going to start lesson 8 of our parenting series we've been doing on motherhood. Today we're going to actually look at the battle of our blind spots. I have the verse Proverbs 9:13 as the base for this message or this lesson. It says, "A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knoweth nothing." I find that that's kind of how we are in regards to our sin. We're foolish. We're even clamorous sometimes in our ignorance of it. And really, we know nothing of just how sinful we are at times because we have blind spots. So I'm going to use kind of the analogy of blind spots when we are driving. And I got this idea again from the book, The Battle Within. And she talked about how when we're driving and we check our mirrors, if we only check our mirrors, we have a blind spot that we might miss seeing something that we need to avoid. And so it's important that we not only check our mirrors, but we look behind us to get a better view of traffic before making a decision. And in our lives, we often have blind spots, things that maybe when looking in our mirrors, we don't really see. And we're going to talk about looking in our heart mirror, that we don't see these things. We need to take a closer look. We need to look behind us to have a better look to reveal these things. You know, in all actuality, our blind spots are acceptable excuses we have made for ourselves. And we've come to depend upon these excuses in our lives as well. We tend to pass off our blind spots as being common or just weakness, and that really everyone has them. So it's just part of being human. But today I want us to look at the truth about these blind spots. Most of them are unflattering areas of our lives that we'd really rather nobody see. We don't want to see them ourselves. Things we just don't even want to acknowledge exist in our lives. And so we're not actually blind to them if we think about it. We've noticed them. We know these issues exist. We've just chosen to ignore them. You know, in my own life, for years, I had an issue with anger, and I chose to kind of ignore it and push it aside or excuse it when it would come up. But as my kids were little, they very much so tested me and I guess applied the hot water to my tea bag, which made those anger issues that I had deep within me arise much more often. And it got to the point where I would yell at my kids, and I shamefully would cause them to cower in fear because I let my anger rule me. And I had to get victory over that, and it took a long time of submitting myself to God and surrendering that as sin and asking Him to help me replace that sin of anger with gentleness and kindness towards my children. And by God's grace, I was able to overcome a lot of that. But do you know, that's still an area in my life that if I'm not careful, it'll creep up again when hot water's applied, that if I've just been ignoring it and treating it as a blind spot, that anger can arise again. What about pride? I've had many moments where I've been full of pride and tried to do things in my own way. And that has also been an area that I've tried to excuse or pass off as not too bad. So I'm not actually blind to my issues. I know they're there. I just want to ignore them. And you know, another truth about our blind spots is that they are challenging to our family members. Our blind spots can really drive a wedge between us and our spouse It can drive our children away from us. Our blind spots are not endearing us to our family members. No one wants to hear our excuses for them either. And another truth is that our blind spots teach our children that it's okay to excuse sin. Our kids will follow our example. If we excuse away our sin, we're teaching them that it's okay for them to do the same. You know, we even chastise them for doing the very thing we're guilty of many times. We like that saying, do as I say, not as I do, but that doesn't actually work. We can't tell our kids, hey, you can't make excuses, and then excuse away our own sin issues. It just doesn't work. So those are some truths about our blind spots, but I want you to choose to see your blind spots. It's important that we acknowledge the truth that really we have seen our blind spots. We know what they are, we're just choosing to ignore them. And instead, we need to switch that around and choose to really look at our blind spots. You know, in order for God to work in our lives, we must call sin, sin, and confess it. That's no excuses at all. We can't ignore it. We can't excuse it. You know, God is interested in our sanctification, and He is constantly working in our lives to make us more like Him. And it's a process. But if we excuse our sin instead of dealing with it, we're not getting any further along in that process of sanctification. We have to submit ourselves to God, confessing our sin in order for Him to work in our lives. In The Battle Within, on page 106, she says, do I recognize that my personality trait, that comfortable old part of me that everyone around me has just had to come to accept, is actually a sinful old pet habit that I'm just too lazy, too selfish to toss out and replace? You know, that's what it really boils down to. My personality trait I like to excuse, or comfortable part of me that I've kept around, it's actually just a sinful pet habit that I'm too selfish to deal with. I really wish you all could just sit and read this whole book, because especially this chapter was really convicting to me. If you haven't, I encourage you to pick it up and read the chapter on the battle of our blind spots, because I have learned so much just listening to her stories and what God taught her in her life. But you know, we have a problem too. We have to recognize that we like our blind spots. You know, we convince ourselves that if we can't see our blind spots, we're not accountable for them. But you know, in real life, that's not gonna work. If we fail to check our blind spots and pull out in traffic, causing an accident, the police officer is not going to accept that, oh, well, I just didn't see it. I didn't check my blind spot. You're still going to be held accountable. And so our problem is we like our blind spots and we want to pretend it's okay to let it be there. I don't have to acknowledge it. If I don't acknowledge it, it's not an issue. That's not true. And you know, we like to use only the mirrors in our hearts. I mentioned this at the beginning, that there are some mirrors in our heart that we use to look at our blind spot to kind of excuse it. I thought when I was reading this about a song from an old cartoon movie I used to watch, where song says, you're sure to do impossible things if you follow your heart. And I've thought many times how deceiving that can be. We're told to follow our hearts, follow your dreams, you know, do what your heart wants. But our heart is so wicked and it will lead us astray. Proverbs 12:15 says, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise." Proverbs 26:11 says, "As a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly." Now that paints a disgusting picture to me of a dog that will return to his own vomit. But you know, we do the same. We get comfortable with our sin, those blind spots we like to excuse, and so we want to be able to return to them, and we just turn a blind eye. We're just as bad as that dog. Proverbs 28:26 says, "He that trusteth in his own heart is a fool, but whoso walketh wisely, he shall be delivered." So what do the mirrors in our heart look like? I want to quickly just go over some of these mirrors we look into, ignoring and not taking a closer look at our blind spots. First of all, it's our personality mirror. We like to say, that's just the way I am. God made me this way. We use this to excuse our anger, our gluttony, our impatience, etc. How about our background mirror? This is the way I was raised. We use this oftentimes to be critical of others. We'll look at them and their failures and compare them to us and, well, the way we were raised, and think things like, well, they should know better than that, or don't they know better than that? We're highly critical and judgmental of others, and we use our background mirror to excuse it. But this can also go the other way. Sometimes women can have had a bad background, and they can use that to excuse them from having a close relationship with other women because they don't want to get hurt again. They might close themselves off to ministering to others in the way God would have them to minister because of hurts in their background. How about our character mirror? You know, in this area, we tend to see our sinful issues, but we ignore the root cause of them. We pass it off as just a weakness or a minor flaw. We also compare ourselves with others to find those who are weaker than us in order to justify our sins. You know, if my character is better than her character, I don't have to feel so bad about my sins. That doesn't work either. How about our expectations mirror? We talked about this last week. Our expectations we have, personal expectations or personal rights we have decided we have. We set these rights up in our lives and then act out in sin when we don't get those things, and we excuse them as legitimate expectations. We can't look at our sin through our mirror of expectations. How about our insecurities mirror? You know, when we look at our insecurities, we tend to shift blame or offer excuses. We tend to look for praise of people as more important than how God sees us. We can also try to overcompensate for our insecurity. And when we do this, we will rely on our own talents and strengths to get us through, rather than looking to God to be our strength and our help. You know, I think as women especially, we have a lot of insecurities. And it's easy to justify our behavior because of those insecurities. Well, I'm just not comfortable talking to people. I'm not a good speaker. By the way, if anybody should not be doing this right now, I feel like it's me. I am not a good speaker. And yet, this is where we are right now. God has called me to be recording these lessons ahead of time and making them available for all of you to watch. I have to so desperately cling to God's strength in order to do this week after week. But you know, it'd be easy for me to say, okay, if I'm prepared well enough, if I have all my lesson notes in order and I've studied enough, and if I go over this multiple times to make sure my speech is just right, I can do this. When instead, I just desperately need each week to rely on God. And I need to not use the excuse of being not fit for the job to do this. There's other areas, each of us have insecurities, but we can't let those justify not doing things. So we have to stop looking in our rearview mirror or our heart mirrors and look at ourselves for who we truly are. We have to examine our sin through the lenses of God's word. God has so much to say about us and our roles and the things he has for us to do. We have to look to his word to examine our blind spots more thoroughly. Then we have to acknowledge that we don't really have blind spots, but unconfessed sin that has become common to us. Let's take the time this week to confess those sins and ask the Lord to reveal our blind spots that we have tucked away and ignored for far too long, rather than confessing them and replacing them with good fruit. The good fruit God has for us. Let's look at that list of mere things and what God would have us to do instead. How about that personality mirror? Instead of those excuses of that's just the way I am, how about asking God to make us more like him? Take the time to look up these passages of scripture. 1 Corinthians 11:1 and Romans 12:2 both have a lot to say in that aspect. How about our background mirror? That's the way I was raised, or that person should know better. Ask God to show you the new creation you can be in him. When we're saved, we're each a new creation. Let's ask God to help us show that in our lives every day, and to have grace and be willing to help others as they are seeking to walk as new creatures. 2 Corinthians 5:17 is the passage that goes along with that. How about our character mirror? Ask God to help you humble yourself and face your sin. James 4:6 and verse 10. And then your expectations mirror. Instead of having the rights you think you deserve, ask God to fill you with his spirit and to give you his desires, not your own. Galatians 5:22 through 23 lists those fruits of the Spirit that he can bring forth in us when we're submitting to him. And lastly, our insecurities mirror. Ask God to help you see yourself the way he sees you, and to help you rely on his strength alone when you are weak. Romans 8, verses 14 through 17. Quickly, I want to go over the homework with you, and I'm actually going to try to do something this week. Anybody who's interested, I'd like to start a private message group where we can discuss this homework. I've been missing that aspect of our lessons, being able to talk about these things with you ladies, and I feel like we need to encourage each other and help each other in this as we seek to become better moms. So if you're interested in being a part of that group, send me a message on Facebook and I'll try to set up a private group for us to discuss these things. But take the time to sit down and do the homework yourself. The first one is, do you believe God will hold you accountable for the sinful habits you've grown accustomed to excusing in your life? Think about this. Obviously our answer should be that yes, God will hold us accountable, but have you been living in that way? Thinking about that? The second one is make a list of blind spots in your life. Better yet, ask a close, trusted friend or your husband to help you compile a more accurate list. Some good leading questions might be, how do I make it hard for you to love me? Or, I know I have habits or character issues that are frustrating to you. Would you mind sharing those with me? Give them time to think about how to respond. Remember to be ready to receive with humility their answers. And then the third is, look at your blind spot list. What mirrors has Supermom used to help you mentally justify rationalize or excuse that sin in your life. And fourthly, systematically work through your list with God, recognizing your sin, its effect on others, and its devastating consequences. Confess that sin, then memorize verses to resist your sinful nature when you are tempted to excuse these sins in the future. Be sure to also reconcile the relationships that have been damaged by your blind spots in the past. This homework has all been taken from the book, The Battle Within. So I hope you'll take the time to do that. Let me know if you want to be part of our private group where we can message and encourage each other and help each other work through these things. Our goal in all of this is to help each one of you to draw closer to the Lord, to be better mothers that can really present Christ to your children. We are His ambassadors, and we want to represent Christ well.